It's fascinating, though, that now there's this. You've probably seen this in the last couple of days in particular. They're just like, but inflation is a global problem.
Yes.
Hold on a second. No, notice this. Inflation is a global problem. Gas markets aren't really the president's fault. None of this somehow is Biden's fault, is now the answer that you're getting. And Nancy Pelosi really kind of, like, because, Pelosi's, I almost respect the shamelessness. This is what I mean. She, whatever she thinks will help the power of the Democrat apparatus, she will say. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how stupid she looks. I mean, come on. Here she is saying that when they talk about inflation, that they want to change the subject. Play clip 9.
When I hear people talk about inflation, as I heard him there, we have to change that subject. Inflation is a global phenomenon. Yes. The EU, the European Union, the UK, the British have a higher inflation rate than we do here. It's not, the fight is not about inflation. It's about the cost of living.
Can I just dive into, they want to, she said, change the subject. This is the single most important issue to voters in every poll nationally that we see. And the third most powerful person in the United States government is saying, Democrats, we need to change the subject.
Well, yes. And let's also address this global argument. So, first of all, acceleration of inflation really took off in Europe when the Ukraine invasion took place. Biden tried to argue, this is Putin's price hike. Remember when he was trying that? Like, he was going around saying, the reason why gas prices are high is because of Vladimir Putin's price hike. And they tried to argue. But if you go look, inflation barely went up in the United States because of the Ukraine situation. It actually did increase oil and gas prices pretty massively all over Europe. But also, the contagion of our COVID response, in the front page of the newspaper in the New York Times today, Buck, has yet another story about how we failed kids as their reading and math scores are collapsing, and they're going down faster in states that, go figure, had more remote schooling than states that did not. But there are a lot of countries right now where there is no major inflationary pressure because they didn't follow the prevailing wisdom of we have to print money like crazy to respond to COVID. For instance, Japan. Japan has almost no inflation right now. So you can look around the globe right now, and there are many Asian countries with nothing to speak of with inflation. United States and Europe have inflation issues, but they're actually different. The Ukraine war is a bigger factor in Europe than it is in the United States. And remember, as bad as inflation is here, it would be far worse if Biden had gotten to spend $5 trillion additional dollars that he wanted to spend, which kneecaps this argument a lot.
Even if there is some truth to it's a global phenomenon, as you point out, it's really a Western world phenomenon insofar as we approach, first of all, there are socialists. I know we call them Democrats here, but effectively socialists in both political spheres that want the same things. Huge government spending, massive taxation, endless regulation, and then eventually one world government control. I know that sounds crazy, but we all know it's true. Eat your bugs, shut up, sit in the dark, maybe get a candle if you're lucky, although candles, burn CO2. That's what they want for people. So it's not surprising that we have a similar outcome with telling people to stay home, we'll pay you during the COVID lockdowns. That's certainly a part of it. But everything that Biden, Clay, has wanted to do would have exacerbated the problem, and there's absolutely nothing that they've even discussed that would deal with things and make things better, right? Their solution is the opposite of a solution. It would actually be an exacerbating factor, and this is obvious now to everybody, right? I mean, this is something that you have to see very clearly if you're paying attention to. Biden comes into office, inflation skyrockets. They don't have an answer for this. And this is why when you hear Joe Biden talking about this, I mean, people are saying, I can't afford gas. I can't pay my rent. I'm running up credit card debt. I'm concerned. And Joe Biden sitting in interviews, play clip 5 here, talking about how we need to subsidize you, the taxpayer, you who are upset about how much you're paying, you need to be subsidizing other countries to address the challenge of climate change. Play 5.
So the industrialized world has to not only clean up our act, but we've got to help these countries do what they need to do without further hurting the environment. And we have to pay them, in my view. We have to compensate them for what they're doing.
People want to be able to pay their bills, Clay. Biden gives us trans activists and interviews in the White House and climate change.
The biggest, I would say, tragedy in general of the Biden administration, and it is a tragedy at this point because he's the worst president of the modern era. I don't think Joe Biden would have ever been a good president, but I think he could have not been a disaster if he'd been in office 15 or 20 years ago. Because I think he would have at least then had the cognitive wherewithal. Buck, we played that clip earlier where he's talking with that random transgender activist who somehow gets a solo interview in the White House. I think that person said that whoever that person's name is had been a woman for like 10 months. I'm not even sure. Like literally is talking about women's issues in the White House and decided 10 months ago I'm going to be a woman, and now is sitting down interviewing the President of the United States. Think about what your grandpa, if you are out there listening to us right now, think about what your grandpa would think about this situation. 78-year-old Joe Biden, I think, Buck, legitimately can't even comprehend the idea that guys now pretend to be girls and that they interview the President of the United States. I don't think he knows what transgender surgery is like. I don't think he understands it on any kind of level. And so he's an awful president now. But imagine getting the most important job in your life 20 years after you would have peaked in the job in the first place, Buck. This would be like if you suddenly got to be a starting quarterback in the NFL and you were a decent quarterback at 30 and you had to do it at 55. Well, you would suck. You wouldn't be any good. And I feel like this is what Joe Biden is. He wouldn't have been a great president anyway, but they gave him the job long after he was capable of actually doing it.
You know, there would have been some honesty if they had run Bernie Sanders. And now he's very old as well. We won't talk about that, but at least in terms of what
way more in control of his faculties, don't you think?
Yeah,
Bernie is.
I think he's sharper. I think that's fair. But there would have been more honesty in what was being offered to the American people. Joe Biden's entire pitch was a lie. Yeah. And when you hear him telling somebody in an interview that he knows is going to be seen by millions and millions of Americans, when he says it is immoral to stand in the way of gender transition surgery for young teenagers, for minors. When you hear him saying that, what he's telling everybody is the Democrat apparatus, the media, the corporate interests that are completely overrun by wokeness, they call the shots. I'm just the husk. I'm the vessel. I, Joe Biden, say whatever the marionettes backstage tell me to say when they pull the strings. That's the way this actually works. And I do think that people who were willing to give Biden a shot, I get it. It was pandemic, and you had been told a million times that Trump was worse than Hitler. People maybe eventually just said, I just want peace and quiet. Joe Biden doesn't give you peace and quiet. Joe Biden gives you this. He gives you madness. He gives you an open door for the left to run through some of the craziest stuff any of us could have ever imagined on a policy front. That's what he's doing. Bernie Sanders was at least saying, I'm a socialist. He was honest about it.
Yeah, if you think things are better now than they were 2 years ago or calmer now than they were 2 years ago, you're just wrong. And maybe, unfortunately, Buck, I think we may even need to explain to some of our audience what exactly he's endorsing when he's saying, hey, this is immoral not to allow. He's saying that your 14 and 15-year-old grandson or granddaughter, if they happen to think that they're having struggles when they're teenagers, that they want to get their breast cut off or their genitals cut off to change their gender, it is immoral. It is immoral of you to in any way question whether that's a good decision.
And can we be clear, the activists, the trans activists also, they're a little more quiet about this, but you will see this popping up in different legislative efforts. They want parents to be unable to stand in the way of this as well. So effectively, your kids, think about the cycle they put them through. Your kids, 8, 9 years old, just learning, don't know. Kids at 8, 9 years old don't know anything. Oh, all of a sudden, it's like Transgender Appreciation Day at school. Oh, everyone's going trans these days. Oh, then you have the gender dysphoria contagion that has already been studied, and then they shut it down, say, oh, that's not a thing. And now all of a sudden, your 9-year-old or your 11-year-old says, well, I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. And then they start going to the school counselor. School counselor says, I'm not going to tell the parents about this because I'm not supposed to under state law. I'm supposed to refer them to a gender transition clinic for, 12 and 13-year-olds. This is what they want, Clay.
Yeah.
This is what they're actually doing, so everyone understands. And this is from the White House on down. This is not some fringe. This is what they want for the future.
Think about how awful 14 and 15-year-olds make many times life-changing decisions if you weren't involved as a parent or grandparent. The White House doesn't want you involved in a decision about what genitals your child has. It's absolutely insane.